In this video, I'd like to talk about the differences between 2D and 3D textures. Okay, so this first sphere, I'm going to give it a material, and I'm going to apply a two-dimensional texture first. Okay, so we'll go into just the color channel, we'll click here, and we can see these two categories, right? 2D textures, 3D textures. If I go to 2D, let's choose fractal. Okay, we can see a sample of that here. Now, we have to press 6, right, to see our textures in the screen. Make sure again, too, that you have viewport 2.0 selected. Now, if we take a look here, we can see that the texture is getting pinched right at the poles. And that's because if we go into UV editor, we can see that it's using the UVs to apply the texture. Okay, so we'll just go here. And so, at the poles, we're getting this kind of sawtooth pattern, and so it's going to look pinched in the 3D space, right? So you can see, too, if we were to create a new mapping, like let's say we applied a spherical map. Whoa, look at that now. See, however our map is looking, you're going to see, however the UVs are altered, you're going to see that effect, right? So here, because we have all the stretching, you can see that showing up there. Or there's another way we could do this, which is automatic, right? And now we have, see in this space, we're getting projections on here from these 6 locations, right? And so you can see those 6 objects there. And then look, you see the boundaries. It's pretty obvious where the boundaries are, right, in our 3D object. You can see where the boundaries are in the UVs. So that's what's difficult about a two-dimensional texture. Now, the texture itself could be changed, right? This is a procedural texture, and so we could change all these settings, right? And they'll update the size and stuff, but it's going to be applied through the UVs, and we're going to end up seeing those boundaries. Okay, so with the 2D texture, we have to be careful how we lay out our UVs so we can minimize seeing these boundaries, right? Now let's try applying a 3D texture. So if we select that sphere, let's give it a material as well, right? The blend. And now we'll go to this color channel, and we're going to go this time to 3D textures, and we're going to use the solid fractal. It's most like the other fractal. Okay, and now we have a different look a little bit. Now this fractal texture, just like the earlier one, we could still change all these sliders and watch it update, its shape and size and whatever, and we could get kind of the same look. But this texture is not being applied with UVs, right? We always get this place texture, but usually it says place 2D texture, and we go here and we're seeing the UVs. Here we have a different node, place 3D texture node. So here we have it selected, and see this little green cube. And so we can see as we move it through space, the effect that's having on the model. And the advantage here clearly is that there's no pinching in the poles, right? Or there's no UV boundaries to mess us up. We get a nice even distribution all the way around. Okay, and this gizmo thing here, we could scale it, right? Or we can move it around. We can scale it in one direction if we wanted, or we could rotate it. And all these things could be keyframed too. You could keyframe all these motions too if you wanted an interesting effect, right? So if we scale it up, we get that. Now this sphere still has its UVs, they're just not being used. This is being used instead for the placement. And if we move the sphere relative to that little gizmo, or you can see we still get that kind of texture crawl, which may not be what you want. So if they move independent of each other, then we're going to get that crawl. But if they move together, then we're fine. So you could group these together, put a group node over them. Like if you hit Control G, right, and then in our outliner, that puts a group node, and then you can move them all around, and that's great. But you still get some texture crawl if you try to move anything within this. If you just point around, you can see we get that kind of crawling effect when we deform it. Even if we just move vertices, right, we're going to get that crawl kind of. Okay, and there is a way to keep the texture from crawling, to have it kind of stick to the surface even if it gets deformed, and that is by having the object active, and then go up to rendering, and then under texturing we're going to create a texture reference object. As soon as I click there, now it's kind of set an intermediate, so the texture gets placed onto the reference object, and then the reference object is used to give instructions on where to place the texture on the rendered object. You'll notice that the reference object is kind of golden, and it's been put into a templated mode. And so now if we move the sphere itself, and it's not working, it should work, but this, we're going to have to go to the legacy. Right, and now it's working. It's still not working with viewport 2.0. But it works with legacy. So this is what's happening now, right? This object is getting its instructions from the reference object, which is getting its instructions from this texture placement. So now we could grab, vertex is up here, and we can move it around, and it's stretching, but the texture is actually locked down onto the surface, right? And that's because it has this intermediate texture reference object. And so 3D textures have the advantage of you can place them without worrying about seams, right? But then of course you get the texture crawl if you move it around. But you could get around that in actually two ways. You could use this texture reference object to kind of lock it down as if it had UVs, or of course you could bake the textures back onto the model. So we could go back to our baker. So let me just select that sphere, and we'll go again up to here to lighting shading transfer maps. Okay, so we could just duplicate this. We could say edit duplicate. Right, we're going to use sphere 2 as the source mesh, so add selected, and then the target mesh, we're going to use sphere 3, add selected, and this time we don't need this normal map, we want to use the diffuse. Okay, and it's going to put the texture here. You could use DDS, I'm just going to use PNG, and I just have the one instruction here, right? So, which is diffuse color map. Move this up, hit bake. Watch the progress down here. Okay, well that's done baking, so we'll get rid of this window here. Now if we take our original sphere and hide it, just hit H, we can see that our new sphere has the texture baked onto it. We could move it around. We can move our vertices, right? And it's just as though it were mapped onto the UVs, because it is mapped onto the UVs. So we could look at it in our UV editor. So we'll go up here to see modeling, then UV, UV editor, right? And we can see how the map is actually kind of stretched out at the poles here to accommodate the UVs, right? But the map itself looks really nice from the top. Look how nice, no pinching, no problem. It's a great way to map without getting any seams, because of course we do have UV boundaries, but it's just mapped beautifully over the top of them.